Today I'm here with Justin Yee. He is a soccer coach at Shooter Soccer Club, and he's one of the co-founders of the Strong Youth Project. And so, Justin, how did you get involved with the Strong Youth Project? What made you want to begin this project with Dr. Seeley, and what does this project mean to you?
Yeah, that's so. Professor Seeley and I, our sons play on the same soccer team. So the idea of this project kind of just started with a simple conversation between two dads watching their boys on the sideline, right? And kind of looking at youth sports from a perspective of, a professor in exercise science department and a soccer coach, but also a parent of, hey, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What could our backgrounds, bringing science and kind of coaching experience together, what could we do with that to improve? I guess that's turned into our aims, right? Like, how do we improve the experience for us as parents, but how do we do it for coaches and then our players the same? Like, what's going on here with youth sports, and maybe how could we help improve it instead of maybe just complaining from the sideline?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of times we just kind of rely on our anecdotal experiences and then kind of apply that to everything. But sometimes that's not the best approach, and we can actually use science to, get better answers to the questions on how we should communicate with others, how youth training should actually be done, and stuff like that. And so, Justin, can you walk me kind of through your background to get to where you are today? Have you always been a soccer coach?
I guess it goes back to life as an athlete, right? And kind of growing up and being in a home where we were very physically active, right? So we water skied at an early age, kind of just physically active, but then got into team sports like most kids when I was probably 6 or 7. And I vaguely remember that first soccer season, but I remember there being a lot of running because back in the day they had 6-year-olds playing on a full-size soccer field with 10 other kids, and you probably touch the ball 3 or 4 times, but you do a lot of running on a big field because you can't kick the ball very far. I kind of remember having fun. I don't remember what fun meant, but I remember, playing a lot of sports and kind of growing up in that environment. And so I kind of gravitated towards soccer. I was a pretty hyperactive kid, and so I think as the story goes, I think I went to one baseball practice or one tryout, and that was the extent of maybe what those coaches could handle with a hyperactive kid. And so I think soccer was more of a good outlet for me and my energy. But I guess growing up, my father was in the military, and so, you live around a bunch of other military kids, so you run around in the backyards a lot, playing war and goofing around and just being outside a lot. So I think we were just really active, and then that community within, growing up in and around military bases, I think there was a lot of kids around, and you're outside a lot and just kind of making up games and playing sports, but then they wanted to be organized. So I think we're always a product of our parents a little bit, right? So bowling was a big thing on my mom's side of the family, right?
Really?
So I think I was in a bowling league when I was 9 years old.
Yeah,
I think my mom just kept putting me in all sorts of different things, and so I remember being in a bowling league. But
did you know what her best score is?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of trophies in my grandpa's house, right? So I think mom
Pretty
was
legit,
like a New England, somewhere Massachusetts, maybe state champ. So she was probably pretty legit back in the day, for whatever that meant. But probably low 200 consistent scores, and so still have trouble beating her today with bowling. But so there's different. Like I said, we just recreationally we water skied, but we went bowling and played a lot of sports, and then I think I was probably 8 when I got into martial arts, and that was probably to hopefully instill some discipline in this hyperactive kid. And and so I grew up playing a bunch of different sports, just always really active. I enjoyed being outside, and had a hard time sitting in the classroom and listening all day long. So sports was a good outlet, but I kind of tried, and I think my parents encouraged me, right, or maybe did disencourage me, if that's the right word. But I remember trying lacrosse in junior high, and played volleyball one year in high school on the fresh soft team, right? But I'm all of 5'6", so I didn't really have much of a career in that, right? But did track and field, but soccer was kind of my main love, but played a lot of sports growing up.
And you played soccer in college too, right?
Briefly, yeah. I had, so that's a whole nother experience, right?
Yeah.
you can play and be pretty good in your area and be good on your high school and be, captain of your high school team and have those kind of first team all honors, but being able to play in college is a rude awakening when you realize like now you're the bottom guy and you're going to sit the bench. So
yeah, that's awesome. So you played all these different sports, and now you coach soccer. And so from the view of like multi-sport specialization, would you say that it's beneficial for youth to go out and play all these different sports and these different activities, or should they kind of dial in and focus on just soccer or just basketball or whatever their sport may be?
So I think generally speaking, we athletes should have a broad exposure to a lot of sports. I think from an athletic development standpoint, you want to develop different movement patterns and different skills, and every sport kind of specializes in the way they move, right, or the way that it's structured and that type of stuff. There's a lot of similarities. Basketball and soccer, I think a lot of ways are very similar, but basketball is a lot tighter space, so it's some of the movement patterns are a little bit limited, but those are transferable as far as skills from one sport to another, which is great. But then I think it goes into temperament of an athlete as well. Some kids really just get hyper focused on one thing and that's all they want to do. So do I think specializing in a sport is terrible? No, right? But do I think the best overall development for athletes is multi-sports? Yes. And so it's kind of I know it can be a tricky topic today, because parents think like, oh, if my kid's going to have a future playing in college or something, then they have to be starting at 8 and fully committed. And I don't believe that, and I don't believe the literature supports that as well.
For sure.
Most Division I athletes were multi-sport varsity athletes in high school. Those high-end, good caliber athletes can play at high levels in multiple sports. And then at some point, if they really want to focus on just one sport, then we kind of let them. But I think forcing them to focus on one sport too early is I believe is detrimental.
Yeah, for sure. And especially if you think about the reason why kids are playing sports, it's not just to be a college athlete, and most people won't be college athletes, so it's important to let kids play around, I think.
No, and that's a good point, right? Like I was reflecting, knowing that we were going to sit here and talk about this, I was thinking about, when did my parents start talking about playing college sports? It's like never, actually. Yeah. Like it never came up. Like sports wasn't the focus of sports for me growing up. It was probably, again, just to channel that energy so that they didn't have to deal with that at home. But it was a lot of the life skills, right? I mean, I do remember that kind of being forced through the martial arts. Martial arts does a good job of that, of really focusing on, character attributes and things like integrity and perseverance and those types of things are things you basically recite, in martial arts, But those, I think, are many ways are things that we're hoping our kids get out of sports, and so sometimes we can get distracted as parents, and I'm guilty of that with 5 kids, right? We see their athletic potential, and we know what it's like to, my wife played college sports as well. She was a dual sport, soccer and track,
Which is
you're a
pretty rare.
decathlete, so she did pole vault. Yeah, pretty rare to be able to do both
two
sports.
sports in college. That's nuts.
And so we kind of, we knew what it took, and our kids are pretty athletic.
Yeah.
But I personally got pretty distracted by that, right? It's like, oh, we can make these into college athletes. It's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just because we know it's the kids that love the game will practice, right? And when you practice, that's where you get better, and that's where you have the opportunity to play at a higher level, is if you kind of love practice, right? But if that's the focus on that being the end reward, I think that can go, that can ruin sports for a lot of kids, because that brings into a whole lot of anxiety issues and some other things that, you're trying to portray. Where am I going to be 5 or 6 years from now for a 12-year-old? Like, they can hardly get through the end of the week, right? So is it a good idea to be putting that type of pressure that everything they do is so they can play at a higher level versus just enjoying the kind of the time and the level and the process at the earlier ages?
Mm-hmm. That's so true. One time when I was at Shooters Soccer Club, I remember you're doing like a little meeting with the parents, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about part of it was about how to properly communicate with athletes during games. And so what were your thoughts during that meeting? I feel like sometimes we unintentionally put this pressure on kids and maybe are a distraction to them. What are some ways in which parents can better communicate to kids while they're playing sports?
Yeah, so that I do that kind of education piece for parents a lot, because I've noticed from a coaching standpoint or a supportive side, right, and looking at myself as a parent, having made a lot of mistakes with my kids, because so often we think as adults, right, that we can impart all the knowledge that we have on an 8 or 9-year-old.
Yeah. Right.
If we just remind them what to do, we can get them to skip those learning processes for themselves. And so oftentimes we think we can information dump on young kids, and we can't, right? And sometimes we start talking to kids as the way we finish playing sports, right? The way our college coaches talk about the game of soccer or any sport is far different than you talk to an 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. And even those definitions, right? If we're an adult and we watch a lot of sports, and I usually use this example with parents, like if we tell our kids to get back, and we want them to hear us, and soccer fields are decent size, so we're going to yell at them, right, from the sideline, or project our voice, if we don't want to use the word yell, right, because we're not, but we're projecting our voice in a loud way of yelling at them to get back. Well, we know as older athletes and people that love sports, get back means play defense, mm-hmm. right? But get back to an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old means like don't touch the stove, or like you're about to get run over, so don't, get back, get out of the road. Get back means something totally different to a kid, and even depending on the context, right? If I hear somebody yell at me, get back, it doesn't mean play defense, right? It means literally step back from where I am, because maybe I'm in danger, Yeah. And so that's another way I try to encourage parents, or just I ask parents, how often do your kids hear you with a projected voice or yelling, and how often is that positive, mm-hmm. So we think we're supporting our kids from the sideline by yelling at instructions or even yelling at them, good job. We see this in sports all the time, right? There's a breakaway, and so everybody starts yelling, right? Wow, how stressful is that for most kids? Yeah. They're never in an environment, even if they watch sports and they hear the crowd, unless you're in that environment and what the crowd can affect you. The crowd can affect you in positive ways, but often even a really energetic crowd at the college level, let's say, right? And all that hype will get that elevated heart rate, right? Get players overly excited, we'll get that adrenaline dump, and then all of a sudden that starts to fade off 10 minutes into the game, and they're too tired, and then they don't know how to respond to that. There's a lot of physiological responses to even just an overexcited sideline, and so if we start thinking about how does an 8 and 9-year-old deal with that pressure, are there better ways for us to support our kids in sport, in that progression, and why do we want to turn a 9 and 10-year-old game into a college or professional atmosphere? Like, why do we want to do that? Yeah. And do kids even grapple what that is, and can they handle that pressure? I don't think so. I think most kids, they can. It's too much pressure, right? Because that excitement is great, but then when they make a mistake and they look at the sideline and the parent's not cheering, or the parent kind of does those gestures sometimes, which is not intended to make the kid feel bad, mm-hmm. But if somebody misses a shot, we kind of have we had that little they missed. Yeah. Right? But how does an 8-year-old interpret that view of you're an athlete, you're a college athlete, right? Yeah. So if you miss a height in pole vault and you look over and you see your coach doing that head nod, right? It weighs on us. Yeah, for sure. In a way, even as a college athlete, that's not a reaction versus if he or she's looking at you and they're smiling and then they give instructions on how you can improve the next jump. It's totally different than the first thing you see is, in a way, we kind of construe that with disappointment, right? Like that head or and so if we're constantly portraying that body image of disappointment to our kids, how much longer are they going to want to play the sport? Yeah. So
for sure. I think a lot of times in sports we put too much emphasis on the specific results, maybe the scoreboard or something, and maybe kids pick up on that and they think that's all that matters. But
yeah, I think we do that a lot nowadays, and so that's a lot of what we try to remind parents or talk to parents. And I believe I was really lucky that way. My parents, I don't think we ever talked about the score. They came to games, but like I got zero advice, got zero anything other than like maybe, my mom telling me to tuck in my shirt and maybe don't yell at the ref because that's inappropriate. Like,
do you think that was good that they didn't give you too much feedback on the game, or do you think that was bad? Or
I think for me and my personality it was perfect, right? Because I think I was my hardest critic anyway. Like I knew when I had a bad game. So if I was sitting at home or sitting on the drive home, right, with pre-cell phone days, so all you had to do on the way home was look out the window and think about the game, right? So if you had a bad game, but then if I had to do that and then have my parents remind me of all the mistakes I made during the game and things I could have done better, I think that would have been really detrimental to me. Like I was a pretty self-driven kid, and I think sometimes I made those mistakes. I think sometimes self-driven kids, like we think, oh, they want that help. They need that explanation. It's like, I know, really they don't. They need to just process the game for a little bit and then maybe just, as well, especially from a parent role, I think we just need to support them and just enjoy watching them play. I don't know that any criticism on the ride home is ever helpful for any kids, especially not at a very young age. Maybe your last couple of years of high school, but even then, that's probably built on years of having a really trusting relationship and really the athlete asking for the advice, not the parent just giving it to them.
So I'm trying to think from like a application standpoint. Like, say your kid had a bad game and you're in the car with them. Like, what kind of communication would you envision in that situation?
Well, I think, so that's a good point, right? Sometimes I see, this happened the other day. I looked at my daughter on the way home from a soccer game, right? And she was just down.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think instinctively the coach was like, well, if you would do this and this better, the next game will go better. But then I had to restrain that side and just ask as a parent, is just remind her of, hey, you did this and this right. And like, Dad really just enjoys watching you play. Right?
Yeah.
So my youngest is 12 years old and my oldest is 21 now, and so I'm never going to see my older kids play competitive sports again, right? Because they're out of that realm. Maybe they'll play rec league, maybe they'll just do something as an adult, but that competitive kind of side is gone, right? And so it sounds so cliche, but it's like, just enjoy the moments with your kids and then remind them of things that you saw them do well. Right? Because I could tell by her demeanor that she was reflecting on the things that she didn't do well. And I don't know that that's helpful. I mean, a little ways, right? Because when we got home, she got the soccer ball out and asked if I would take her to the park and work on some things, but it wasn't me initiating it, which I've done with my older kids, which just didn't work, right? They didn't want any of that. Even if in their mind they thought that would be helpful, they didn't want Dad telling them that that's what they should do. So I think we need to somehow walk that fine line of allowing our kids to initiate that and be there for them, but then just remind them. And I think it works. I share this of like, hey, I really loved watching you do this. You've done this so much better recently. So all that hard work that you've been putting in is paying off. So don't worry about the score. Don't worry about those couple mistakes. And I think by 20 more minutes later of driving home, she got that point where it's like, oh yeah, I have gotten a lot better. And now she's coming up with a solution to have a better game next time, and she's initiating all of that. And I think, of seeing all the things I've done wrong with my kids, that was probably the best thing that can happen, is having them make those choices, right? And then just be there as a parent if we want to support them. Once they ask for it, if we're willing and able, more able than to provide that for them, then that's where we step in, right? But we don't force them into extra trainings or, hey, you're going to go do this speed coach because I know you need to be faster, right? If they ask for a speed coach or that type of stuff, like, yeah, go do that with them, right? But don't force them to go do it. I think that's the quickest way to get them to not want to play sports anymore.
Yeah, and I'm not a parent, but I imagine that's kind of tough because you see all the things they can get better at, and you just want them to succeed, and you want to force them to, I don't know, not force, but just like you want them to succeed, so you want to pour everything on them. But sometimes, just being there and being supportive is the best way to go.
I think long-term strategy, probably the best way.
Yeah. Okay, so now kind of wanted to take a little detour, but you are also like you were working at a CrossFit gym before, right?
So yeah, we actually, my wife and I owned a CrossFit gym. And
You
so,
owned a CrossFit.
Yeah, so there's probably about 10 years where I was coaching a lot of athletes from different sports.
Okay.
Right, from an athlete development standpoint, using some of the CrossFit methodology is actually very broad.
Yeah.
Right? The idea is that you focus kind of on your weaknesses, and you know they have a whole kids youth program which really just focuses on overall athleticism. Right, so we started implementing that with a lot of youth sports and part of that reason I did that was because so many kids were specializing in sports, right, and having majored in exercise science, kinesiology, right? Like I knew that there's the idea of overuse injuries is in my mind, right? I'm not the PhD, so we'll have to get Seeley on here to kind of explain that. But I think if you specialize in one sport, you're kind of limiting your movement patterns. Each sport has kind of a set amount of movement patterns that they do, and if you only play that one sport, then you're kind of the overuse comes in repeating that movement pattern over and over without other ones. Right, so you got certain muscle groups maybe overworking, and so that's where you can get into overuse injuries, and so it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because it's like, well, let's have them work out more, right? Yeah. Send them to me, and we're going to work them out more. They're suffering from overuse injuries. It's actually, and that is kind of the concept and the philosophy was, hey, they're using that too much. Let's expose them to some other movements so we can gain some of the benefits that their sport needs, but doing other movement patterns. Right, and we saw a lot of success with that, taking athletes and exposing them to other movement patterns. Because there is a learn kind of thing. As you learn movement patterns, it helps you master the patterns that you're trying to do for your sport. Right, it kind of broadens that horizon and then shores up other muscles and muscle groups so that those ones that are getting used a lot in that sport have the other supportive muscles to kind of help with that load. You know, and so I spent a lot of time with a lot of different athletes, and what I noticed at a young age is that whether they're swimmers, soccer players, baseball players, like the kids all need the same things. Like our bodies really don't do that much, you know, as far as like our arms, right? Our upper body, all we do is push or pull, you know, and then we run or we squat up and down. Like that's really all we do. There's a lot of versions and variations of that to get them out of some of those patterns and into other ones. And so, but that's where I started noticing through working with a lot of athletes from various different sports, a lot of the psychological components were very similar, right? Because like you know, as a college track athlete, even though it's like 10 events, right, it's hard to specialize. But once you get to a certain level, it takes a lot of effort to get a little bit better.
Yeah. A
lot, right? And that can weigh on us as athletes because you'll spend hundreds of hours for half an inch on the pole vault, you know, or an inch or two, you know what I mean? Like, or a tenth of a second, you're spending hundreds of hours to get that tenth of a second. And so we sometimes, especially young athletes, if they're not seeing that improvement, that weighs on us, right? Is the effort worth it? Is all this time worth it? So then all of a sudden you expose them to different movement patterns, and you allow them to see themselves getting better really quick. Right, because it's not movement patterns they normally do, but they're athletes, right, or they're strong already. So once they start picking up those movement patterns, they see a lot of acceleration really quickly, and that just boosts confidence, right? Because we're working towards a goal and we're seeing a lot of improvement, right? And then that kind of reminds them like, oh, it's worth putting in the time for this, you know, inch or two, you know, because eventually you get to that point as an athlete where you put in hundreds of hours for an inch, you know, and we talk to our higher end athletes, like our college athletes or our really high performing high school athletes, is like, yeah, you're going to work, you know, hundreds of hours, and it's a game of inches, right? So in that moment, you'll hit that inch, right? But you'll spend hundreds of hours for that inch, you know, whereas a new person to a new sport, you get a lot of gain really quickly. So I think there's a lot of psychological benefits. Again, that kind of goes back to our question about playing multiple sports, is allowing them to start excelling or seeing progress in other domains, right? Because if you only focus on one domain, right, and you're in that valley, because we all hit it, right? You're in that rut or you plateau, it becomes very challenging, right? So if you have room for improvement in other aspects, I think we can get athletes off those plateaus and at least still performing and driving and being motivated towards their sport, you know, so.
For sure. In regards to, you know, just strength training for youth in general, I know for me personally growing up, that was a very kind of a hot topic a little bit. You know, I was told that if I started lifting before high school, I'd, maybe stop growing or stuff like that. For your athletes, what is your advice to them in regards to strength training and weightlifting? Like, what age should that take place? What should that kind of look like for them?
Yeah, so this goes more towards the parents, right? Because I think a lot of times parents hear that, right? If our kids lift a lot of weights, it's going to stunt their growth. Right?
Yeah.
That's still a myth that's out there, right? If they lift a lot of weights, and I kind of always jokingly say, well, if that's true, our farm boys from the Midwest would all be, 5'1", right? Because they're out at a young age working on the farm, carrying stuff, just working, right?
Yeah.
And it tends to be the opposite. They tend to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, right? Like that's kind of a reminder there too, right? And so I think what happened is there was in the 60s or 70s, there was this idea that like, oh, look at these gymnasts, look at these weightlifters, power lifters, they're all short, right? And so it must be because of all that exercise and workload that made them short, right? Just like basketball makes people tall, right? It's like, well, no, the sport just allows, if you're going to flip and twist and turn, being short allows you to do that faster. So at the higher levels, you're not going to have a 6'4" gymnast because they just can't rotate and spin that fast, right? Just like you're not going to have a 5'1" basketball player playing center in the NBA, right? The sport kind of starts to filter out different body types, but it wasn't the sport that made basketball players tall or gymnasts short.
That's a good
right?
point.
And so we kind of just, it's an education piece. And so then I go back to answer your question, right? I think gymnastics, just control of your body, right? And I remember being a kid running around the woods, right? Building forts, carrying rocks and setting up things. Kids can handle a lot of load, right? And even a gymnastics component, right? If we ask parents like, hey, do you think it'd be good if your child could do a pull-up, right? And I've never had a parent say, no, I think that's unhealthy. Like if a kid can pull themselves up on a bar, that's probably really unhealthy and dangerous for their joints. No, we know that's probably a really good thing, that they can pull themselves up. Well, if your kid weighs 60 pounds, they're doing a 60-pound lift.
Yeah, that's...
You know what I mean? And so it's strengthening. They're doing that body weight. And so I think early on, gymnastics is a great activity to get sports like kids into. Let them play on the monkey bars, right? Again, if your kid can go across monkey bars, which have largely been taken out of most parks, but if you can find monkey bars, right, and your kid can go across the monkey bars, most parents think that's a good thing. But again, and I see parents do it, right? They put a 2 or 3 year old and they have a 2 or 3 year old hanging from the monkey bars because we know that's good for them, right? But yet we don't want them lifting 4 or 5 pound weights or 10-pound weights, but we'll have them, again, hang their 40, 50, 60, 70 pound body from a bar, and we know that that's okay. So it's just a matter of reshifting the understanding of what it is to move weight.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, the barbell looks intimidating and it looks like, oh, that could be dangerous. But for development standpoints, like that external load on joints is healthy, right? We know sedentary kids have less bone density, right? Jumping is good, right? That stress is good for them. So controlling their body weight, right? Controlling, cartwheels, front rolls, like being able to move their body really well is a great foundational base for any sport, I believe, and then once they start moving into, and again, I go into that, like now we're redefining what is weightlifting, so if we can have kids doing push-ups and, doing sit-ups and getting up off the ground and kind of squatting up and down and doing front rolls and hanging from bars, right, that's all really good things. And then you could take more of a traditional, like let's say weightlifting lift that you see at the college gym, you can start doing that technique at a really early age for kids. And again, you could, as parents start to understand that and think about that for themselves, right? If we can have kids do a handstand, right? Which is really cool. When you see a kid doing a handstand, like, again, that's cool. Pretty neat, right?
Yeah.
But again, if we think about that, if you have a 60, 70-pound kid, right, or 100-pound kid doing a handstand, they're holding 100 pounds over their head. It's flipped, right? But it's 100 pounds over their head. Mm-hmm. So is it dangerous to have 20, 30-pound weights, for a kid that's 100 pounds over their head? Is that dangerous? Like, probably not, right? Changes the whole idea of when we look at the type of loads that we don't believe to be unsafe, things like handstands, things like pull-ups, you know, and jumping off things, right? You know, from an exercise science, right? There's a lot of force jumping.
Yeah, there is.
So if you jump off of a table, right? And all parents like this. We love when our 2-year-old toddler jumps off a table and lands. Like, that's super cool. That's a lot of force.
You do that a lot and it hurts your legs.
Yeah.
So.
You know, and so, but then we don't want to, but parents are hesitant about having their kids do squatting motions.
Yeah.
Right? Holding a 10-pound weight, right? The amount of force that's generating is far less than allowing your kid to jump off the coffee table. Yeah. You know, which most parents of athletes would have no problem with their kid jumping off a coffee table if they're landing safely, right? So
yeah, as long as
that's part of that fold of teaching them. That goes back to the gymnastics. Teach them how to move well, right? And then let them kind of explore and see what their capabilities are. Mm-hmm. To bring that back goes back to those farm boy strengths and people that work. You know, it kind of does the opposite, right? It strengthens the bones, and it induces more of the human growth hormone, all those types of things. You're taking use of those hormones and stuff, which, you know, when those hormones are flowing and you're inducing that stress and load, we actually get more growth and more strength out of it, not stunted growth and more injury. So yeah, I think it's a good thing for parents to kind of think about.
That's good. And there's a lot of myths out there in regards to strength training, so it's good to just, you know, read the literature and you know, and you don't have to rely on anecdotal evidence. So just as like a, you know, for like parents and application standpoint, say like I don't have a kid, but say I had like a 13-year-old kid who wants to weightlift. Do I just let him go to Vasa or Planet Fitness or something? Like, what would be kind of your tips or suggestions for?
Well, so I know CrossFit's gotten a bad rap in some applications, and I think that's largely unfair. It's been kind of shown it's kind of the opposite, right? I mean, if there's stuff out there that says weightlifting and that type of stuff gets kids hurt, you know, and I've been in a lot of high school weight rooms with football players and that type of stuff. Like, we need to have good coaches, you know, and a community like CrossFit, like they have CrossFit, you know, CrossFit for kids, they have certifications for that. They have a whole education process of how we should be teaching those movements and doing that type of stuff. So I would have parents go make sure you have a good coach that's teaching your athlete how to move well, you know, not worried about the weight, but how well they move, so they can do it safely, you know, because it is extremely beneficial when done properly. Yeah. You know, and that's always the key. So I think CrossFit communities, you look at it now worldwide, there's probably 12,000 gyms. So if they were hurting people on the weekly and hurting tons of kids, I don't think you'd have the worldwide influence that they have had. I think it's been much more on the other side. And you've got lots of athletes, and CrossFit has brought back the Olympic lifting in a lot of ways, right? The clean and jerk has made that much more standardized because they have teaching processes and curriculums for that, so that we can do that safely with the athletes, right? And CrossFit was kind of the first place that I saw them promote, you know, a 6-ounce PVC pipe to teach power cleans and power snatch, and not allowing high school age athletes to move to a barbell until they could move that PVC pipe really well. You know, so I think those types of patterns are having coaches that are willing, and parents, right, to take that time to learn how to do the movement properly, and then the weight will come. Yeah,
kind of progress as you go.
You know, the same way as having owned a gym where we'd get calls from parents of being, hey, I want a speed program for my kid. Like, oh, great. Like, how old's your kid? 10. It's like, oh, 10. Like, we're not really developing speed the same way a lot of parents think we are. You know, there's a lot happening in speed. You know, there's a lot of coordination to it. There's a lot of balance. There's a lot of strength required to have speed, right? So a 10-year-old's kind of either going to have it or not. It's kind of a long way to get them to really be fast, and you have to take a lot of steps back of teaching them how to walk properly, how to run properly. Yeah. Right? Track knows that. Track masters the high knees, the butt kickers, all the skipping,
it's
right?
It's more complicated than you'd think.
Way complicated to do it correctly, right? Yeah. But you spend a lot of time on that. Let's flip that back to you. How much time do you spend on running mechanics?
Every day for a long time.
Right, and continuously, right?
Yeah, you just gotta keep working on it.
You know, so it's a long process, I think, and that's another reminder to parents is like, just remember it's a long process. There's no quick way to get fast. There's no quick way to get strong. There's no quick way to build mental fortitude. That takes time, and it takes, you know, opportunities for kids to face adversity. It's the only way to get that mental fortitude, right? Is to have some down times and work through that. And that type of stuff. So, but Yeah, I think a lot of it too is now for the projects. I'll kind of go through this, right? Of having parents go back and ask themselves the question is, what do we want our kids to get out of sports? Like, what do we really want them to get out of it? I know for me now, like, getting out my ego out of the way with my older kids, right? It'd be really fun to be a parent of a college athlete, But in reality, I want to be a parent of kids that have gained, how to work as a team, how to put in the work year after year, striving to be better, having faced ups and downs and seeing, being on teams that lose, right? But being good friends and being there for each other in those hard moments. Like, those are the things that I really want, for my own kids now, but especially for my athletes, right? And I think it's a very welcoming message, I believe, to a lot of parents. I think parents truly, we know that, but we get caught up in some of the social media stuff of, like, we want to be that parent of that athlete that's there, but I don't think we know what that takes oftentimes, right? There's a lot of hardships in being a college athlete and getting hurt and going through those different things, right? And, we're in the mix of, the playoff soccer series, right? You got BYU doing really well this year, but I always remind parents, like, even whether it's basketball or soccer, especially basketball and soccer, the NCAA starts with 64 teams in the tournament, right? 63 of those teams are gonna end on a loss, right? And each of those soccer teams, if they have 10 seniors, right, you got over 600 players ending their college career with a loss.
Yeah.
Like, sports is not about winning games. Right? There's so much more to it. And so that's a lot of the project, right? The Strong Youth Project that we're trying to do, and why we love having, the students here at the university participating in that, because our athletes kind of know that, right? But sometimes we feel that pressure of winning, that's what we're defined by. But in reality, like, you're gaining so much from sports, right? And we don't want to be defined, we don't want to be labeled as whether we won or lost that game, right? But we want to be known for, like, hey, we spent 12 years mastering our craft, right? And that's the type of person we are. We're going to take care of our teammates, and we're going to be good professional people, right? That's what I tell parents, like, hey, we're training professionals, right? They're not going to be, chances of them being professional soccer players, like, next to none, right? But can they be a good brother, a good sister, a good employee, a good, all those other good attributes that we truly want for our parents, for our kids as parents. And so I think as we continue to focus on that, but allow those parents to also be celebrated and for that motivation versus, did we win Saturday's game? And at what cost did we, was winning that game? Because if most of us have been involved in teams, you can win games and sacrifice the development and psychological component of a lot of people or a lot of players on that team just so you can win that game. So how are we winning, and why? Is really what I think a lot of the focus of the Strong Youth Project really is to bring that aspect of sport back into youth sports, right? It's for everything else. It's to strengthen the families. It's to strengthen those relationships between parents and their kids. Not make it worse. Which sometimes I think sports really does, right? When those expectations or hopes don't align with our youth and our kids, and so.
And to parents and youth and coaches that are watching, how do you suggest for them to kind of implement the Strong Youth Project into their lives? How should they go about using this as a tool to better their sporting experience?
Yeah, I think we're starting to put a lot of content, like, on our website, right? So try to implement a lot of its lifestyle, right? Like, what are we doing better on and off the field? Like, sports is very much a way of self-improving, right? And opening up conversations and having those types of things. So a lot of times for parents, it's more of just remember the long vision that we're after, right? And celebrate those. There's lots of things that we can turn any game so that kids have multiple wins regardless of the score, right? Like, how many times did they try to attempt a pass, right? Because maybe they dribbled too much, or they even just getting their head up to look for a pass is kind of that first step, right? So as a parent, are we counting how many times? Like, you tried 5 passes, that's awesome, right? Because sometimes kids are afraid to make a mistake, so they won't make a single pass, right? Because they don't want to mess up. So just reframing what is success, kind of keep having those conversations and enjoying, just kind of watching kids play, and let them play, and then let them have those opportunities or resources if it does happen, and try to do our best for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a lot of, like you mentioned before, there's a lot of resources on our Strong Youth Project page that kind of go over these topics. And one thing that I really like is also the social media accounts, the Instagram page, going over different topics that are really important to youth in sports. I don't run the social media, but like I love looking at it, and I love like applying that stuff to my life. It really applies to anyone. Like this last month was, we went over sleep, and there's so many different things that I didn't realize about sleep, and I started not using my phone an hour before bed, and my sleep became so much better. So there's so many things, and it's just about going out and getting the information, and the Strong Youth Project has that information.
Yeah, and then hopefully as parents, right, like we want the most for our kids, and hopefully even as parents we take that opportunity, and coaches, right, I often will say this to my coaches, right, like we're asking our kids daily to be better. We're asking them to do things at home, right? Are we also sharing with our athletes what we're trying to do better, right? Do we let them know that we're on this journey as well? Yeah. And so I think even as parents, right, we can use that opportunity as we have our kids, but I think kids are motivated by working with others, and especially parents and coaches, when they see a parent or coach that takes what we're trying to teach seriously and really implements that in their life, then those are the best ways to affect change, is to kind of bring everybody along on that journey, right? So
yeah, I love that. Before we end, as a soccer player and a soccer coach, what's your favorite team?
What's my favorite team? I'll say the BYU women's team right now.
BYU women's team. Do you think they're going to keep winning?
They
They're
a pretty amazing comeback on in the Elite Eight.
That was
right?
nuts. That was crazy.
And again, that's fun too, right? Like there's a player on the team that's from Southern California that I got to work with in my gym, and so following her for a number of years now, and seeing her have, a couple goals in that Elite Eight was exciting, especially when the first half I was like, oh man, this is how the career ends, because she's a senior.
Yeah.
And then she bounces back that second half, right? So that's that reminder of, like kids have to lose sometimes to have that glorious comeback, right? They have to have bad games to have that story of coming back. So, no, I don't. I follow, as far as sports though. Like I follow coaches that, implement character. Those are the best stories, right? And when we hear championship teams, I love watching sports in general, right? And I love hearing people that win. I love hearing them thank their family and their friends, and the amount of sacrifice that goes in. The adversity, I think there's a universal thing. Anytime you see a championship team, they always talk about the adversity they faced as a team and how they came together. Like that's what creates winning teams, right? Mm-hmm. Not sometimes as parents we want our kids just to go undefeated and not have any problems, right? That's not a very exciting story when they win the championship and they're like, hey, we just had a great season, we just romped on everybody and we didn't have any problems. Like nobody wants that story, right? Yeah. And that's the beauty of sports, is we actually want that. We want to see people overcome adversity, and that's why I love sports, and why I think, this project is going to impact a lot of people and help a lot of coaches and parents and athletes really develop and have a positive experience with sports that they can take on to the rest of their lives and live out those fun superhero stories through sports. Yeah,
I think so too. And thank you so much for your time today, Justin. I already feel like a smarter person. I know this has been helpful, and I bet this is going to be helpful for other people listening today.
Well, Ben, we're gonna flip the script here at some point and talk about your journey as an athlete and your current dreams. We were talking about this, right? So everybody should know on the way over here that your desire to go to Olympic trials this year and that type of stuff. Like that's pretty amazing, right? And so we'll let you share that story, and we're excited to watch your journey, right?
Thank you, appreciate it.
And be there in the ups and downs for you, right? Because you're awesome as well. So thank you.
I appreciate that.